There was a time when childhood smelled like glue, before smartphones, before endless scrolling, before children disappear behind glowing screens. Millions of American kids sat around kitchen tables with tiny plastic pieces spread out in front of them. They weren't just playing, they were building. Many people still remember opening that cardboard box for the very first time. The excitement, the colorful artwork on the cover showing a fighter plane soaring to the clouds, a race car speeding down the track, or a mighty battleship cutting through the ocean. Inside the box were dozens of plastic pieces attached to thin frames. To most adults, it looked like a pile of useless parts. But to a child, it looked like possibility. It looked like adventure. It looked like something extraordinary waiting to be brought to life. For millions of Americans, plastic model kits weren't just another toy. They were a rite of passage, a lesson in patience, a source of pride. And sometimes, they became some of the most treasured memories of childhood. Many people can still picture exactly where they built their first model. The kitchen table, the basement workbench, the garage beside their father, the smell of paint filling the room. Newspapers spread across the table to protect it from spills. Tiny instruction sheets unfolded with careful hands. There was always that warning. Take your time. Don't use too much glue. Be careful not to break the pieces. At first, it seemed impossible. Dozens of tiny parts, confusing instructions, pieces that never appeared to fit quite right. But little by little, something remarkable happened. A child learned patience. A father offered guidance. Mistakes were made. Pieces broke. Glue ended up on fingers. Paint found its way onto shirts. But eventually, a plastic airplane began looking like a real airplane. A tank became a tank. A race car became a race car. And for the first time, many children experienced a feeling that has become increasingly rare today. The satisfaction of creating something with their own hands. The hobby exploded after World War II. America had fallen in love with aviation, engineering, and military history. Children admired fighter pilots. They dreamed of becoming astronauts. They memorized the names of famous aircraft and battleships. Companies like Revell and Monogram recognized that fascination and transformed it into one of the most beloved hobbies in the country. Suddenly, model kits were everywhere. They appeared in department stores, toy shops, hobby stores. Even neighborhood stores carried them. For just a few dollars, children could bring home a Spitfire, a Mustang, a Corvette, or the latest spacecraft capturing the nation's imagination. Throughout the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, the hobby entered its golden age. Birthdays often meant receiving a new kit. Christmas mornings revealed brightly colored boxes beneath the tree. Kids saved their allowance money for weeks just to buy the next model they had been dreaming about. Friends showed off their finished creations. Brothers competed to see whose model looked more realistic. Bedrooms slowly transformed into miniature museums filled with airplanes hanging from ceilings, tanks lined across shelves, and cars proudly displayed on dressers. But perhaps the most important part wasn't the finished model. It was the time spent building it. It was the father who stayed up late helping his son attach tiny wings that refused to cooperate. The grandfather who explained the history behind an old warplane while carefully painting its markings. The older brother teaching patience to someone younger. Conversations happened naturally. Stories were shared. Lessons were passed down without anyone realizing it. The models eventually gathered dust. Some were accidentally broken. Others disappeared during family moves. But the memories stayed, because these kits were never just pieces of plastic. They became moments of connection, moments that many people would one day look back on and miss. For decades, it seemed impossible to imagine a future where these simple boxes would become relics of another era. Then, slowly and almost without anyone noticing, everything began to change. When the comic book market crashed in the 1990s, many collectors were left shocked. The issues they had carefully stored away, believing they would one day pay for college tuition or retirement, often turned out to be worth far less than anyone had imagined. Comic shops that had once been packed with eager customers struggled to survive. Some closed their doors forever. For many fans, it felt like watching a piece of their childhood disappear. At the same time, the world itself was changing. Video games became more immersive. The internet transformed entertainment. Children who once spent afternoons reading comics were now spending hours online. Streaming services, smartphones, and social media competed for every spare moment of attention. The ritual began to fade. No more bike rides to the local comic shop. No more spinning the comic rack while deciding how to spend a few dollars. No more arguments with friends over who would win in a fight between Batman and Spider-Man. As older collectors grew older, fewer young readers entered the hobby in the same numbers. Long boxes filled with carefully preserved comics ended up in attics, closets, garages, and basements, sometimes forgotten, sometimes inherited, sometimes rediscovered decades later by children sorting through their parents' belongings. And when those boxes were opened, they often contained more than comic books. They contained memories. The issue someone bought with their allowance after weeks of saving. The comic a father gave his son because it had been his favorite growing up. The worn copy that had been read so many times the staples had begun to rust. The autograph collected at a convention that once felt like the greatest treasure in the world, because comic book collecting was never just about value. It wasn't really about finding the next rare issue. It was about imagination. It was about hope. It was about believing that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. For countless children, superheroes became companions during difficult moments. They offered courage during uncertain times. They reminded readers that setbacks didn't define who they were. That responsibility mattered. That kindness mattered. That even flawed people could rise above fear and become heroes. Today, comic book collecting hasn't disappeared completely. Dedicated collectors still hunt for missing issues. Conventions continue drawing passionate fans from around the world. Local comic shops still survive in many communities, welcoming anyone curious enough to walk through their doors. Parents still introduce their favorite heroes to a new generation. And somewhere tonight, someone will open an old long box and pull out a comic they haven't seen in years. The pages may be yellowed. The corners may be bent. The cover may carry the marks of a childhood spent reading under blankets with a flashlight long after bedtime, but the feeling returns instantly. For a moment, they're 12 years old again, standing in front of a spinning comic rack, trying to decide which adventure to bring home. The golden age of comic book collecting may be behind us, but the stories never really ended. Because the greatest thing comic books ever gave us wasn't the possibility of becoming rich. It was a belief that no matter how ordinary life seemed, courage, imagination, and hope could still change the world. And maybe that's why, even after all these years, we still remember exactly how it felt to turn the page and discover what happened next.